The air in Washington, D.C. crackled with a nervous energy, the kind that precedes a major storm. Inside the West Wing, phones rang unanswered and hurried footsteps echoed through the hollowed halls. The source of the pandemonium? A single audacious move by India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi that had sent shockwaves through the American political establishment. It wasn't a military maneuver, nor a fiery diplomatic condemnation. It was something far more subtle, far more dangerous, a quiet, calculated economic realignment that threatened to unravel decades of carefully constructed American influence in Asia. The seeds of this seismic shift were sown long ago in the fertile ground of economic discontent. President Trump, with his signature brand of protectionism, had slapped a crushing 50% tariff on a range of Indian goods, from pharmaceuticals to steel. The justification, as always, was unfair trade practices, but for Modi, it was the final straw. He saw it as a blatant attempt to bully India into submission, to force it to fall in line with Washington's agenda, regardless of its own national interests. The move was perceived in Delhi as nothing short of economic warfare. Modi, a leader known for his steely resolve and unwavering commitment to Indian autonomy, wasn't about to back down. He understood that India, with its burgeoning economy and strategic location, held cards of its own, and he was ready to play them. The first sign of India's rebellion came during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. While the world's eyes were focused on the usual diplomatic niceties, Modi was quietly forging alliances, engaging in intense private meetings with senior Chinese officials. The message was clear: India was exploring alternatives, seeking partners who respected its sovereignty and offered opportunities for mutual growth, free from the suffocating constraints of American dominance. The summit served as a wake-up call for Washington. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. India was drifting away, drawn by the magnetic force of China's economic might. The implications were staggering. India, once envisioned as a cornerstone of America's Indo-Pacific strategy, a bulwark against Chinese expansionism, was now flirting with the enemy. The response in Washington was a mixture of disbelief and anger. How could India, a fellow democracy, a longtime ally, turn its back on the United States? Accusations of betrayal flew thick and fast. Some whispered about Modi's personal ambitions, his desire to carve out a place for himself in the New World Order. Others pointed to the deep-seated resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface of the Indo-American relationship for years, fueled by perceived slights and unmet expectations. But the truth was far more complex. India's shift wasn't simply a knee-jerk reaction to Trump's tariffs. It was a strategic calculation, a pragmatic assessment of the changing global landscape. China, with its vast market and seemingly limitless resources, offered a path to economic prosperity that America, with its protectionist policies and unpredictable leadership, could no longer guarantee. The article in the Economic Times, highlighting the burgeoning partnership between India and China in the development of rare earth minerals, served as a stark reminder of the stakes involved. These minerals, essential for everything from smartphones to electric cars, were the lifeblood of the modern economy, and China, with its dominance in the rare earth market, held a crucial advantage. By aligning itself with Beijing, India was securing access to these vital resources, ensuring its future economic growth and technological advancement. The partnership was a direct challenge to American dominance, a bold statement that India was no longer willing to play by Washington's rules. The U.S. National Security Council, usually a fortress of calm, was now a pressure cooker. Trump, never one to back down from a fight, had reportedly ordered his advisors to conjure up some kind of magic formula to lure India back into the American fold, but the State Department, usually brimming with optimism, offered a grim prognosis. Reversing this course would be like trying to turn back the tide. The truth, whispered in the corridors of power, was that Washington had fundamentally misread the situation. They saw India as a pawn in their grand game of chess against China, a convenient counterbalance to Beijing's growing power. They failed to recognize India's own ambitions, its desire to chart its own course in the world, free from the constraints of Cold War-era alliances. The Atlantic Council report, with its blunt assessment that India was now an opportunistic player, stung. It was a public admission that the old rules no longer applied, that India was no longer willing to play the role of dutiful ally. Vijay Gokal's revelations about the unprecedented levels of cooperation between India and China were even more alarming. Joint exploration of rare earth resources? Chinese firms gaining access to India's logistical networks? This wasn't just economic cooperation, it was a strategic partnership that threatened to undermine American interests on a global scale. The Wall Street Journal's report that the Trump administration was considering even more tariffs against both China and India seemed like a desperate, almost comical attempt to regain control. Experts, however, warned that Washington's time for ultimatums had passed. India had already made its choice. It was building a new economic framework, one where China played a central role in its industrial and technological future. Piyush Goyal's carefully worded statement that India's relationship with China stood independently of its negotiations with the United States was a masterclass in diplomatic ambiguity. It was a way of saying, without actually saying it, that India was no longer willing to be dictated to by Washington. The resumption of discussions regarding joint military exercises between India and China in the Ladakh region, the very site of their past border clashes, sent shivers down the spines of Pentagon officials. Intelligence briefings painted a disturbing picture. China was steadily expanding its military presence across the Himalayas, and India was seemingly willing to turn a blind eye, even participate in joint patrols. Beijing, quick to seize the opportunity, launched a full-scale propaganda offensive. Chinese state media outlets began hailing Modi as a visionary leader, a champion of the developing world, a man who dared to stand up to Western hegemony. The Global Times went so far as to declare that India and China were together building a new order of fair and balanced global trade. The Bloomberg report that India was considering participation in China's digital yuan initiative was the final nail in the coffin. If India adopted the digital yuan for international energy transactions, it would deal a devastating blow to the dollar's dominance in Asia, further eroding American influence. Inside the White House, finger-pointing had reached fever pitch. Some officials conceded that they had underestimated Modi's resolve to act independently. Others blamed the disastrous trade policies that had driven India into China's arms. The Financial Times warned that unless the United States fundamentally revised its approach, India would lose all remaining interest in maintaining any alliance with the West. For Trump, the irony was a bitter pill. His grand strategy, the one that was supposed to contain China, was imploding. The pivot to Asia, the cornerstone of his foreign policy, had become a pirouette toward Beijing. What began as a trade dispute had morphed into a geopolitical earthquake, reshaping the balance of power in Asia and leaving the United States scrambling for answers. So, what to do next? Fight to win India back? Or accept that it had chosen another path? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unresolved. But then came the twist, the unexpected turn of events that threw everything into even greater confusion. Trump, with his penchant for the dramatic, suddenly announced that India had agreed to scale back its imports of Russian crude oil. Modi, he claimed, had personally assured him of this during a recent phone call. New Delhi, however, remained conspicuously silent. No confirmation, no denial, just an unsettling void where a statement should have been. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs, when pressed for comment, offered nothing. The silence was deafening, fueling speculation that something was amiss. Was Trump simply making things up? Was he trying to save face? To spin a narrative of success out of a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control? During the White House Diwali celebrations, Trump doubled down. He praised his strong relationship with Modi, insisted that India had already cut its Russian oil purchases significantly and would continue to do so. He spoke with an almost unsettling confidence, as if he knew something that no one else did. But the facts on the ground told a different story. India's energy strategy had been a source of friction between Washington and New Delhi since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. As Western nations imposed sanctions on Moscow, India had emerged as one of Russia's largest new markets. Discounted prices and growing energy demands at home made it, New Delhi argued, an economic imperative. American officials, however, saw it differently. They accused India of indirectly financing Russia's war effort, of undermining Western efforts to isolate the Kremlin. New Delhi vehemently denied these accusations, insisting that its trade decisions were guided by economic necessity, not geopolitical alignment. The Trump administration, unwilling to accept this explanation, had ratcheted up the pressure. Steep tariffs on Indian exports, some as high as 50%, were designed to punish India for its continued purchases of Russian oil. These measures had hurt Indian exporters, straining a partnership that had once seemed unbreakable. Yet, in recent weeks, there had been signs of a thaw. Trump's tone toward India had softened, and trade negotiations between the two countries had shown progress. Officials in both capitals hinted at the possibility of a breakthrough, a potential agreement in which India would commit to gradually reducing its reliance on Russian crude while pursuing broader energy partnerships with the United States. The Mint newspaper, citing sources familiar with the matter, reported that such an agreement could be announced soon. But once again, New Delhi remained silent. The Indian Commerce Ministry refused to comment, leaving the world to wonder what was really going on behind closed doors. India's position in the global energy landscape was evolving, shifting under the weight of American pressure. The outcome of these negotiations would determine whether the relationship between India and the United States would stabilize, or whether it would face another round of economic and diplomatic turmoil. The stakes were high, the players were powerful, and the world was watching with bated breath. The lack of official confirmation from New Delhi regarding Trump's claims about reduced Russian oil imports only deepened the mystery. Was this a masterful game of brinkmanship, Modi playing both sides to extract maximum concessions? Or was it something far more unsettling, a sign that the carefully constructed facade of Indo-American friendship was finally crumbling under the weight of conflicting interests and broken promises? The silence from New Delhi spoke volumes. It suggested that Modi was unwilling to publicly endorse Trump's narrative, perhaps because it would alienate Russia, a long-standing strategic partner. Or perhaps he was simply unwilling to give Trump a political victory, knowing that any perceived concession to American pressure would be seen as a sign of weakness at home. Whatever the reason, the episode exposed the fragility of the Indo-American relationship, revealing the deep-seated mistrust and conflicting agendas that lay beneath the surface. It was a stark reminder that in the world of geopolitics, there are no permanent friends, only permanent interests. As the world waited for New Delhi to break its silence, speculation ran rampant. Analysts debated the potential implications of a shift in India's energy policy, some arguing that it would signal a renewed commitment to the Indo-American alliance, others that it would further cement India's alignment with China and Russia. The truth, as always, was likely somewhere in between. India was navigating a complex web of geopolitical and economic interests, seeking to maximize its own strategic advantage while avoiding being drawn into the orbit of any single superpower. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required a deft hand and an unwavering commitment to national autonomy. The Trump administration, meanwhile, was growing increasingly impatient. The tariffs on Indian exports were already causing significant economic pain, and there was a growing sense that Washington's attempts to bully India into submission were backfiring. Some within the administration argued that it was time to adopt a more conciliatory approach, to offer India incentives to reduce its reliance on Russian oil and to strengthen its ties with the United States. Others, however, remained convinced that pressure was the only language that Modi understood. They argued that Washington should double down on the tariffs, imposing even more punitive measures until India finally caved. This hardline approach risked pushing India even further into the arms of China and Russia, but its proponents argued that it was the only way to protect American interests. The debate raged within the White House, with no clear consensus emerging. Trump, ever the unpredictable leader, vacillated between these two opposing viewpoints, sending mixed signals to both New Delhi and the rest of the world. The uncertainty surrounding India's energy policy was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The broader question was whether the Indo-American relationship could be salvaged, whether the two countries could find a way to reconcile their conflicting interests and to forge a new partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. The answer to that question would depend on a number of factors, including the outcome of the ongoing trade negotiations, the future of the Russia-Ukraine war, and the evolving balance of power in Asia. But one thing was clear: the old rules no longer applied. The world was changing, and India was changing with it. The United States could either adapt to this new reality or risk being left behind. The choice, as always, was theirs. The truth, as it often does, lay buried beneath layers of political maneuvering and carefully crafted narratives. Sources within the Indian government, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed a far more nuanced picture than the one being painted by either Washington or the Western media. Yes, discussions were ongoing regarding India's energy policy, and yes, there was a willingness to diversify away from Russian crude, but not at the expense of India's own economic stability. The real story, they whispered, was about leverage. Modi was playing a high-stakes game, using the threat of continued reliance on Russian oil as a bargaining chip to extract concessions from Washington on trade and technology transfer. He wasn't about to abandon Russia entirely, but he was willing to make adjustments, provided that the United States offered something of equal value in return. This wasn't about choosing sides in a new Cold War. It was about securing India's place at the table in a multipolar world. It was about maximizing India's strategic autonomy, ensuring that it wasn't beholden to any single superpower. The key to understanding Modi's strategy lay in recognizing his unwavering focus on India's national interests. He was a pragmatist, not an ideologue. He was willing to work with anyone, regardless of their political system or their past actions, as long as it served India's goals, and those goals were clear: economic growth, technological advancement, and a secure and stable neighborhood. To achieve them, India needed access to affordable energy, cutting-edge technology, and reliable trade partners. If the United States was willing to provide these things, then India was willing to cooperate. If not, then India would look elsewhere. The problem, from Washington's perspective, was that Modi wasn't playing by the old rules. He wasn't content to be a junior partner in the American-led world order. He wanted a seat at the head of the table, a voice in the decisions that shaped the global landscape. This ambition was unsettling to many in Washington, who were accustomed to viewing India as a pliant ally, a reliable counterweight to China. But Modi had a different vision. He saw India as a rising power, a force to be reckoned with, a nation that deserved to be treated with respect. The current standoff over Russian oil was just one manifestation of this larger shift in the global balance of power. It was a test of wills, a battle for influence, a struggle to define the future of the Indo-American relationship, and the outcome was far from certain. Much would depend on the choices that both sides made in the coming weeks and months. Would Washington be willing to compromise, to offer India the concessions it needed to feel valued and respected? Or would it continue to rely on pressure and coercion, risking a further deterioration in relations? Would Modi be willing to bend, to make concessions of his own, to reassure Washington that India remained committed to the principles of democracy and the rule of law? Or would he continue to pursue his own independent course, even if it meant alienating the United States and drawing closer to China and Russia? The answers to these questions would determine not only the future of the Indo-American relationship, but also the shape of the emerging world order. The stakes were high, the players were powerful, and the world was watching with bated breath. The game, it seemed, was far from over.